Alright, so today what we're going to do is we're going to start doing long division with polynomials. So before we get started on actually dividing polynomials, what I want to do is just go over the basics with long division, okay? This is the same long division that you guys would have done in your 5th grade classrooms. I know a lot of times we don't work out long division by hand anymore, but in this case we're going to review it so that way it'll help you guys when we actually start dividing polynomials. Okay, so let's look at a really basic example. Let's say we wanted to divide 3 into 114. Okay, so we've got our basic steps here. So I'm going to try to put 3 into the first digit, which is 1. Now of course 3 can't go into 1, so what we do then is we try the first two numbers. So that would be 3 into 11. So we ask ourselves, how many times does 3 go into 11? 3 goes into 11 3 times. Okay? So up top here, we're going to put our 3. Right? So we could say that that first step is to divide. Okay? We're going to make a little list, a little way of remembering the proper steps for long division to help us later on. So now what we do is we multiply 3 times 3, and we put it down here, which is 9. So we can say our second step would be to multiply. And then our third step is to subtract. Okay, so whatever we bring down, we're subtracting that. 11 minus 9 is 2, so we're going to write a 2 down here, and then of course we have to bring down whatever's left. So we're going to subtract, that's the step we just did, and then the last step is to bring down. Okay, so these are our basic steps when we're performing long division. So once I bring that down, the process basically starts over again. I'm going to go up here to divide, and I'm going to ask myself, alright, how many times does 3 go into 24? 3 goes into 24 8 times. So I'm going to put my 8 up top here now. Then I'm going to multiply again. 8 times 3 is 24. So I'm going to write that down and of course subtract. That's our next step. We're subtracting. That gives us 0. Okay. And then there's nothing left to bring down, so we're done here. So there's a couple things to point out besides the fact that 38 is the answer we want to. Okay, 38 is our answer, but the answer is also called our quotient. All right, so 38 is the quotient. That's the result of what we get by dividing 3 into 114. All right, 3, we call that the divisor. That's what we're dividing by. And then the thing we're dividing is the dividend. All right, so this is some terminology that many of you already know, but you're going to see it again. We're going to hear it, so it's important to talk about. So, again, the term or the polynomial, which will be in a few moments, the term that you're dividing by, this is the divisor. Inside of our long division box is the dividend, and then up top here, our final answer is the quotient. Okay, so there's a couple different conclusions you can draw from this, even though this is basic math. All right, there's a couple things we could say here. First of all, we could say that 114 divided by 3 is of course 38. Right? Likewise, 114 divided by 38 is 3. And another thing that we could say is that 3 times 38 has to give us 114. All right, and to use some of our terminology that you're going to hear in this section with polynomials, both 3 and 38 would be factors of 114 since they divide evenly into it. Okay, so again, that's just a basic review of long division. And so again, to help you guys out, there's a little mnemonic device that you can use to remember the steps. All right, and you can certainly come up with your own mnemonic device, whatever helps you to remember. The one that I actually like to use, which is pretty easy, is does McDonald's sell burgers? All right, so does McDonald's sell burgers? Divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. And hopefully that will help you guys to remember the proper steps for long division. Okay? So what we want to do now is actually work out a couple examples with long division. And so what we're going to do is just work on an example, one which has a remainder or does not have a remainder, and one that does have a remainder, to see the difference in those two. Okay? So our first example that we're going to try here, our divisor here, this is going to look a little bit different. This is actually number 15 on your worksheet. All right? So our divisor is going to be a polynomial. So we're going to have 5n cubed minus 13n squared minus 24n plus 18. Okay, keep in mind we're dividing polynomials now. And the divisor is 5n minus 3. Okay, so we're dividing this polynomial by this divisor. Our quotient we're going to get on top, and that will be our answer. So the steps are the same. All right, and we can write our little mnemonic device. Does McDonald's sell burgers? And again, this is for divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. So the only difference, or the way that it would probably be easier for you to think about it in terms of how to get started here, is instead of asking yourself, well, how many times does 5n go into the first term, like we did when we were just dividing 3 into 114, we want to ask ourselves, what can I multiply 5n by in order to get 5n cubed? All right, that term is going to go up top here, and the term that will do that is n squared. Okay, so n squared times 5n will give me this term. So that's how I determine what goes up top here. All right, so that's our divide step. Okay, now we're going to multiply. So when we multiply, we're going to be multiplying n squared times 5n, which gives us 5n cubed. Okay, and you will always actually be creating this first term. Now I have a second term here, so I'm still going to multiply n squared times negative 3 and put it over here as negative 3n squared. Notice I'm lining up my like terms, and you'll want to do that throughout. This should have been a 24n. Let me fix that. Okay? So now the next step, I've already divided. Now I multiplied. Okay, my next step is to subtract. Now when you go to subtract here, you're really going to have to change the signs because you're subtracting each term. So this is going to become minus 5n cubed. And if I'm subtracting a negative, that's actually going to turn into a positive. So that's our subtraction step. So think about it this way. If your term is positive, it becomes negative. If your term is negative, it becomes positive. In other words, just change all the signs of whatever you get from your multiplication step here, and then add up your like terms. That's basically what that step is. So your first two terms, if you notice, these are going to add up to 0. All right, and that will always happen if you're doing it properly. We're going to add these up. We've got negative 13n squared, excuse me, plus 3n squared. That's going to give us a negative 10n squared. And then that's our subtraction step again. And lastly, we have to bring down. Bring down negative 24n and bring down positive 18. So at this point, we still have some terms left, so we're going to keep on going until we get to the point where we can't divide any further. So we're going to start the process over. We're going to look at 5n and ask ourselves, what term could I put here so that when I multiply it by 5n, I create my new first term, my new leader, which is negative 10n squared. So if you ask yourself that, the term that will do that is going to be negative 2n. So I'm going to put negative 2n up here. And again, the reason we're choosing this is because if I multiply negative 2n times 5n, I'm going to get negative 10n squared. So let's go ahead and multiply that. So that was our divide. Now we're going to multiply. Negative 2n times 5n is, of course, negative 10n squared. And then negative 2n times negative 3 is going to give us positive 6. And I don't write the plus signs because I know my sign's going to change to a negative. That's just how I do it. Our next step is to subtract. So we're going to turn that into a positive. This is going to become negative. We're going to subtract from there. Again, these first two terms should always add up to 0 if you're doing this step properly. Just a way to check yourself. We're going to add these up and get negative 30n. And of course, don't forget to bring down. So that was our subtraction and bring down. Okay? So if I look here, I'm going to keep going because as long as I can find a term to multiply this guy by to create the leader in my line, I'm going to keep going. Now if this was just, well, even if this was 30, we could actually still keep going. But if I get to the point where there's nothing I can think of here to multiply by this term to create the first term in my line, then we can't continue and we just write it as the remainder, which we'll do an example like that later on. Okay, so the last step I'm going to do here, I'm going to ask myself, what do I multiply 5n by in order to create a negative 30n? Well, in order to do that, I'm going to choose negative 6. Negative 6 times 5n is going to give me my leader, which is negative 30n. So we're going to write that down. Okay. Negative 6 times negative 3 is going to give me positive 18. And I don't write the plus because that makes it easier to write when my sign changes. So we did our divide, our multiply. Now we're subtracting. Again, those two add up to 0. And actually here, these also add up to 0. So we end up with a remainder of 0. There's nothing left to bring down, and we can't go any further. Okay? So from here, we're going to have our answer. The quotient, or the result of our division, is n squared minus 2n minus 6. Okay? And again, just to tie this in with the example that we did before, there's a couple things that we can say here that we need to mention just so that we understand all the different terminologies. So again, this up top, on top of the division box, this is the quotient, which is our answer. 5n minus 3, this is our divisor. And then my polynomial that's inside the division box, this is our dividend, to make sure we understand all the different terms. So in addition to that, this polynomial, this is another way of writing it, 13n squared minus 24n plus 18 divided by 5n minus 3 equals what we got up top. All right, equals our quotient. Likewise, if we were to multiply 5n minus 3 times n squared minus 2n minus 6, we would get our polynomial up top here. So again, we can actually say that 5n minus 3 and n squared minus 2n minus 6 are factors of this polynomial. Okay? Each of these we could say is a factor of this polynomial. All right, so we're going to do one more example where there's not a remainder, so you guys can see what that'll look like, and so you get an idea of when you just have to stop because you can't go any further. Okay? So we did one example where there is no remainder. Now we're going to do an example where there is a remainder. The steps are going to be exactly the same. The only thing that'll look a little bit different is going to be our answer. So what we're going to do is we are going to divide. This is number 21 from your classwork assignment. We are going to divide negative 10x cubed negative or minus 26x squared plus 7x minus 6 by 5x minus 2. Okay? So we have our dividend, we have our divisor, and we're looking for our quotient. All right? So let's write our little mnemonic over here to help us remember our steps. Does McDonald's sell burgers? Divide multiply, subtract, bring down. And so let's go ahead and get started. We want to ask ourselves, what term can I multiply 5x by in order to create this term, negative 10x cubed? The term that'll do that is going to be negative 2x squared. Okay, so 5 times the negative 2 will give me the negative 10. X and an x squared is going to give me x cubed. Okay, so I divided. Now I'm going to multiply. When I multiply, of course I get my first term because that's our whole goal. And then next I'm going to multiply negative 2x squared times negative 2, and I'm going to get a positive 4x squared. So again, I don't write the plus sign because I know I'm going to change my answers. So we multiplied. Now let's subtract. When I subtract, we're going to go through and change our signs. And what are we going to get? Well, we know these two are going to add up to 0. Don't say cancel. All right, add up to 0. And these guys are going to add up to negative 30x squared. And last but not least, we're going to bring down our remaining terms, which is 7x minus 6. So now the process is going to start over again. We've got a 5x, and our leader is negative 30x squared. So what term can I put in here so that I can create this 30x squared? Well, the term that's going to do that is just going to be a negative 6x. Okay? So negative 6x times 5x is going to give us our negative 30x squared. Negative 6x times negative 2 is going to give us a positive 12x. So we divided, we multiplied. Now what's next? Subtract. We're going to change our signs. The first two terms are going to add up to 0, and we're going to add up everything else that's remaining. So from here, we're going to get negative 5x minus 6 once we bring down. And then we're still going to be able to continue because as long as I can find a term that I can multiply 5x by to create this term, I'm going to keep going. So all we have to do is make this a negative 5x. So that means we just need a negative 1 up here. So we can still keep going, but we're almost at the end. So when I multiply negative 1 times negative 5x, of course I create that negative 5x. Negative 1 times negative 2 is going to give me positive 2. And then I'm going to subtract. So we divided, multiplied, now we're subtracting. We're going to change the signs. These two are going to add up to 0, and oh, I don't get 0 here. I get a negative 8. All right? Now, the important thing to note here is that I've got a 5x, and I would be trying to create a negative 8. So there's nothing I can multiply 5x by in order to make a negative 8. There's nothing I can do because there's always going to be an x there. There's no x here. I can't create the term. So this 8 is our remainder. All right? So now there's a special way that we write the remainders with the quotient or in the answer. So the way our answer is going to look is we're going to have a remainder, okay? And there's a couple different ways to write it. First of all, many of you are familiar with this term where you can just write remainder and whatever the value is. But another way that you're often going to see it, because we're working with polynomials instead, is it would be negative 2x squared minus 6x minus 1, and they'll write the remainder over the divisor like this. And I know this looks kind of weird because it looks like a scary looking fraction, but this is just another way of writing the remainder. We can have the r with the actual remainder, what's left over, or we can write it in the fraction form. And you need to be familiar with both of these forms when you're writing the remainder. So, again, this is our dividend, our divisor, and our quotient. Okay, this is still our quotient. This part of the quotient is the remainder. All right. This one doesn't divide evenly, so we would say that 5x minus 2 is not a factor of the dividend. All right, it is not a factor. It does not divide evenly into it. And that's pretty much it for polynomial long division. All right, so that's all there is to it. If you just follow the steps, and again, our steps are divide, multiply, subtract, and bring down. Does McDonald's sell burgers? And pay attention to your signs. There's no reason why you can't do this with much success. All right? Hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks. Bye-bye.